full moon in Capricorn. On June 30th at 1:55 a.m. Central European Summer Time, the moon is full in Capricorn at 8 degrees. And opposite the sun in Cancer, the two lights along one axis are the hinge of the whole wheel. A full moon is a lunar body at maximum light standing opposite the sun across the zodiac. The half of the cycle where what was seated at the dark of the moon 6 months ago is now lit all the way up and can be looked at directly. This one falls at 8 degrees of Capricorn, with the sun answering from 8 degrees of Cancer. And if you want to find that in your own chart, look for the house that holds Capricorn and then the house opposite that holds Cancer. And this light is going on both at once, and we will go through all 12 signs before the end. Okay, now Capricorn is Saturn's house, and Saturn is the planet that astrology signed to time and limit and weight and the long arc, the wall, the clock, the law of the father, institution. Cancer is the moon's owned house. It's the place of the body and origin and belonging and the maternal line and a person comes out of before they belong to anything in the world, the womb. So this axis holds two kinds of power against each other. There's the authority that legitimizes and ranks and outlasts, and then the older belonging that you came from before anyone else could categorize you or put you somewhere of who you are. And the full moon is this lunar body that is crossing into the sign that least wants her there, and then she's doing it anyway. Hi, my name's Megan. If you don't know me, I am an astrology student. I started studying astrology formally about 6.5 months ago. And how I learn best, I'm learning, is that I learn something, I research it, I write it, and then I share it. And the best way to learn is to teach and to integrate, and so here I am. If you like my style, then I would love to work with you. There's all sorts of readings available down in the description box, or you can go to my website, meganriley.eu. I have to update my website. And all sorts of fun readings that we can do, and also different price points as well. There's also memberships you can check out at Buy Me a Coffee. All of that is down below. Now, Capricorn is Saturn's house. Oh, we did that. So let's begin with the condition that the moon is in. The moon in Capricorn is in her detriment because it's the sign opposite to the one that she rules. She rules Cancer. She's in Capricorn, which is opposite, so she is in detriment. Demetra George and Chris Brennan read detriment as a body operating where its own nature gets the least support, where it has to do its work against the grain of the sign that's hosting it. And the moon is instinct and attachment and the tide of need and feeling that rises and falls in a body on its own schedule. And then Capricorn is the sign that says to override that and perform on cue, and it doesn't matter what the body feels, and emotions don't matter, and only the mind matters, right? Submit to only what you feel is required. So the moon full in Capricorn is this feminine instinct made to keep institutions time. It's like bereavement leave that is only 3 days long, and we're supposed to be through bereavement after those 3 days. It's desire that's scheduled around everyone else's needs, or a body that's treated as this thing that has to be managed toward a standard instead of a creature with a rhythm of its own. And here she is at full strength and full visibility tonight, and she is doing it in the house of the very system that constrains her. And then there's one more thing about this moon that the dignity tables don't catch, because it's a matter of declination rather than longitude. The moon tonight is out of bounds. Out of bounds means a body has wandered past the furthest north or south that the sun ever reaches, beyond the belt of the sky that the solar year draws as its limit. The sun never crosses that line. It's the edge of what is sanctioned, of what is allowed, the boundary of what the sun will allow. And the moon tonight is nearly 4 degrees past that line. It's about as far outside the solar limit as the moon can ever travel. And the reason is this slow rhythm that most people never really hear about. So every 18 and a half years, the tilt of the moon's path stacks on top of the tilt of the sun's. And then the moon swings out to the widest declinations that she can reach, north and south, and stretch the old sky watchers called the major standstill. This last one peaked in 2024 and 2025, and it's only just behind us. So the moon's reach past that solar line is still close to its greatest. This is not a moon who just slipped over the line. She's deep outside of it. And what makes it sharp is where she does it. She's out of bounds in Capricorn. It's the house of the planet whose whole business is limit and structure. And the body of feminine instinct has exceeded this sanctioned range while standing in the very sign that exists to set the range. And then she does it at the top of the chart, conjunct the midheaven, the most public point of the sky. So the transgression is lifted to the summit of the wheel in full light rather than hidden in some low corner of it. And traveling with her, also out of bounds and even further past the edge at over 4.5 degrees, is Black Moon Lilith. And she's at 21 degrees of Sagittarius. And this is raw feminine power. So we have two feminine bodies past the fence at once. One of them, the moon herself, at maximum light and maximum power at the highest angle of the chart. And then the system owns the sign. Then the lunar body stepped clear over its wall and climbed to the most visible point even above that. So the patriarchal account of Capricorn is the climb. The goat that scales the mountain, the self-made ascent, dopamine searching, mastery earned through endurance, right? Hold next to what Saturn is the lord of the sign, and that's in the Greek telling. Saturn is Kronos. And Kronos was a titan who learned that one of his children were going to unseat him. And so what he did was he swallowed each one at birth, taking the future into his own body to keep his seat. This is exactly the engine of the patriarchy. It's the engine of the system rendered as a single image. The father who consumes what he comes after so that nothing can replace him. He eats the generation to keep the throne. And Capricorn is his house. So ambition in the version that's handed down is dressed up as a virtue. And underneath it is Kronos, eating his children. Now Rhea, who's Kronos' sister and wife, watched 5 children go down his throat. And with the 6th, she stopped. She hid the infant Zeus, wrapped a stone in a swaddling cloth, and handed her husband and brother the stone to swallow in the place of the child. Now, the whole future of the Greek cosmos just turned because of who Zeus becomes. And the infant she saved was nursed in hiding by Amalthea, the she-goat, whose milk fed the god and whose broken horn became the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, which is the original image of abundance in the Western imagination. The goat in Capricorn's cliff is Amalthea. The wealth that Capricorn is supposed to symbolize, the storehouse, the plenty, the resources that endures, comes out of the body of a feminine animal who fed a god and was remembered mainly as his equipment. Now let's go back to Andrea Dworkin. She was reading myth as a system for moving resources from women to men and then erasing the transfer. And Amalthea is that move in a miniature form. So her body produces the abundance. The abundance gets attached to the sign of mastery and ambition, to the climb, and to Saturn, the father. Now the horn outlives the goat as a symbol of plenty, while the goat herself drops out of the account. So when the moon comes full in Capricorn, the lunar body is standing inside of this whole story, in the house built on a devouring father, lit up over the spot where a mother's commitment and then the feminine animals stolen plenty are buried under the language of ambition and strive and respect. The full moon is the light that's going back on over the part of the story that was painted out. How beautiful. Now, the Cancer Capricorn axis of belonging against authority, right? The womb against the structure of where a person comes from against how they are ranked. Capricorn is the state, the corporation, the bank, the white supremacy, the church as an institution, the long arrangements that outlive people inside them and then hand out legitimacy, standing a position in the world. Cancer is the origin of everything that rests and never created, the body that you were born into, the family and the land and the mother that made you, the womb. Every system that Capricorn represents depends on a Cancer it did not build and cannot reproduce. So the bare fact of people being born, people being fed, people being kept alive, there's no charter or balance sheet that can be kept about that. And a full moon across this whole axis turns the lights up on both. What it shows is which depends on which. The institution issues rank and legitimacy, while the body, born and fed and kept alive, that issues the life that the institution then presumes to grade. And once a year, the sky lights up both rooms so you can see which one is standing in the other. And that is this full moon. So now let's look at some history. It is a house the heaviest bodies in the sky have been working on for almost 2 decades. Pluto, the planet of what is buried, of death and transformation, what is excavated, what is broken open and remade, entered Capricorn in stages across 2008, with the final ingress on the 27th of November 2008. Remember 2008, November? The first months of Pluto in Capricorn were the global financial collapse. The banks being the institution that the sign governs most directly, and what the collapse revealed was that the authority of the whole financial system, which had presented itself as solid and beyond question, was hollow at the core. Everything from predatory lenders, right? And so the opening statement of 16 years in Pluto pulling apart the house of institutional authority and then showing what it was really built on. The decade that then followed was this long discrediting of one institution after another. The governments and the press and the churches and the expert class all losing the standing that they had once been able to assume to claim their permanence and their legitimacy, and it all cracked. Now, the work reached its hardest point on the 12th of January 2020 when Saturn met Pluto at 22 degrees of Capricorn. I don't know if you remember this. It was January 2020. Saturn met Pluto, and almost immediately we started hearing about an illness coming out of China. Almost immediately. The Lord of the sign and then the planet of excavation were conjunct in the house of institution. Within weeks, the pandemic was global, and what put it on trial was, again, legitimacy and the competence of the institutions themselves. the agencies testing it in the open, right, everywhere. Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn brought this authority of the institution to its reckoning at the largest possible scale. Then the weight moved on. So then there were vax protests. Then there were, in the US, there was one certain response, and then the rest of the world had a different response. I'm hearing about the response that happened here in Europe, and it was very different than the US. So what makes this full moon specific is now Pluto has left Capricorn for good, settling into Aquarius across 2024. Saturn is gone too. Tonight, Saturn is at 14 degrees of Aries, getting ready to go retrograde in Aries. And for the first time in years, Capricorn is empty of these huge, slow bodies that occupied it. So the house of institutional authority has been excavated, discredited, and then vacated by the powers that tore it open. And now here comes the moon into an emptied Capricorn, a sign that has just been through 16 years of having its foundations pulled up and inspected, and she crosses in out of bounds with Lilith in Sagittarius lifted to the midheaven at full light. She is walking the institution's house in the quiet after all that heavy machinery has been pulled out, lit all the way up, standing past the wall that the sign exists to defend. What changed is that the body of feminine instinct, raw, maximum visibility, now has the run of a house of authority that its own guardians have abandoned. And what she does here, while it stands wide open and undefended, is the question of the day. So the dispositor tells you that the work is unfinished. The moon is in Capricorn, so the moon answers to Saturn. Saturn is the body that we look to for where this authority finally rests. Saturn is in Aries, in the sign of the self, of force, and of first move. And all from there, it throws a square to both lights, to the moon and to the sun. So a square is loose, it's just under 6 degrees, but it is the ruler of the whole lunation, pressing on it from the sign of initiation. The Lord of the institution is no longer at home in the institution. He is in Aries, in the territory of the unaccommodated self, leaning on the full moon at an angle. So just think about that as the institution's own logic, Saturn, having left its building and then reappearing as raw assertion with the will to start over and the cardinal fire of Aries. Neptune sits nearby at 4 degrees of Aries, also squaring the lights, but even more loosely, 4 degrees as opposed to 8, right? This 4-degree difference. But Neptune adds in the dissolving and the fog and the difficulty of seeing the new beginning clearly while it's still forming. I wouldn't base the whole reading on this Neptune square alone. I think it's a contributor, but it's not the main story. With Saturn, it thickens a little bit just because of the dispositor. And the sense that the authority governing this move is here. Now, the tender thread to follow about all of this, because the moon doesn't only answer to hard squares, she reaches by a very tight contact, just under a degree, across to Juno at 9 degrees of Aquarius, where Juno sits with Pluto. The aspect is a semi-sextile. It's a 30-degree contact between adjacent signs, the reach of a body in one room toward the next room over. And we talk a lot about Juno being the marriage asteroid, and she is that. She demands equality. She demands equanimity. She is all of those things. She's more than that too. And I keep learning about her. She's older and larger than just a marriage contract. So Juno is the Roman Hera. And Hera was a sovereign goddess in her own right long before she was anyone's wife. She is a queen of the sky. She has her own cult and her own great temples at Argos and Samos. She is worshipped as a power who answered to no husband. Walter Burkett traces her standing as an independent great goddess of the pre-Hellenic world, predating her absorption into the marriage with Zeus. The myth of that marriage is a myth of conquest. Zeus took her by a trick, and what the later stories say that her jealousy and her wrath is more accurately the fury of a sovereign who has been demoted into a consort and never once accepted the demotion. So Juno is less the wife asking politely for fair treatment inside the arrangement built to subordinate her, and more about the queen who predates this arrangement, whose power was real before the marriage annexed it, and whose rage across 3,000 years of myth is the sound of that older sovereignty refusing to stay buried. Now she sits with Pluto in Aquarius, the sign of the collective and the future, the sign that Pluto just moved into. The planet of excavation is on the sovereign queen, in the sign of what comes next, which reads as the buried queenship being dug up and remade for the collective to come. The moon in Capricorn out of bounds at the top of an emptied house of authority, leaning across the threshold toward Juno and Pluto in Aquarius. That raw power, feminine, reaching toward the older sovereignty as it returns to power. That reach is the most hopeful thing in the chart. And it's the thing that we're going to come back to. The moon in Capricorn, out of bounds, at the top of an emptied house of authority, leaning across the threshold toward Juno and Pluto in Aquarius. That raw, feminine power reaching toward the older sovereignty as the older sovereignty returns to herself. Now, let's look back 6 months. The seed in late Capricorn. So a full moon is a culmination, which means that it answers to something that was set in motion before it. And the Cancer Capricorn story has this annual rhythm that is always, we can always trace. The lights were last conjunct in Capricorn at the new moon on January 18th, 2026. If you think back to what was happening, check your photos, check your calendar, what was happening there on January 18th, 2026. And it was at 28 degrees of the sign. This is almost the anaretic degree, 29 degrees. Almost the last full degree before the sign runs out. And it's the place, it's a crisis point. There's something that's being pushed to its limit. And the institutional seeding of this happened at the very end of Capricorn, at the degree of exhaustion and of a system run all the way to its edge. So if you think back to the institutional pressure in your own life, that was in January. The obligation that something had been pushed past its furthest point. Some arrangement felt like it had nothing left to give. And that was the seed. So on the 30th, the moon brings the lunar half of that same axis to full, not at the same degree, but on the same hinge. And says, what has grown out of that edge? The seed was a system at its limit. Now we're harvesting and we're walking through this empty house and reaching towards something different. Now, 6 months forward. So the immediate next move is inward, right? 2 weeks from now on July 14th, the new moon falls at 22 degrees of Cancer. So if the lights are regathering in the dark in Cancer, on the Cancer side, The public culmination on the 29th and the 30th is followed straight away by private reseeding. And the cycle turning from the lit world back into the dark, asking, what is it that's getting started in the room of the body and its belonging in the womb once the institution, Capricorn, has been looked at? So that's the rhythm of the whole second half of the year. The lights spend the next 6 months walking the rest of the wheel, and then we meet again in January. And there's eclipse season in that window. See, there's so much happening. And it's not on Cancer Capricorn axis, which is part of why tonight's full moon is such a clean cut. The moon's nodes are moving this year, and I love it. Through the first half of 2026, there's one more Pisces Virgo eclipse, but not before a Leo Aquarius eclipse. So Leo Aquarius eclipse, then Pisces Virgo eclipse, and then we go straight into Leo and Aquarius. And total lunar eclipse, the 3rd of March at 13 degrees of Virgo. Remember that? that was interesting. First half, I wrote these dates down. The solar eclipse on the 17th of February. That's when I started this channel, the 17th of February. And in the last degrees of Aquarius, pulled by the North Node in Pisces, and then the total lunar eclipse on the 3rd of March. And then at the end of July, the nodes cross over, and the North Node leaving Pisces for Aquarius, and the South Node leaving Virgo for Leo. And they hold there for the rest of the year. So what's next coming are the Leo and Aquarius eclipses. The next one is on the 12th of August at 27 degrees of Leo. The dark moon will swallow the sun in the sign of sovereignty and display, and a partial lunar eclipse on the 28th of August at 5 degrees of Pisces. The moon close to the new North Node in the last degree of Aquarius. So Cancer Capricorn axis itself comes back around at the year's end. The full moon of December 24th at 2 degrees of Cancer is the lunar light, now full in her own domicile. The body is lit up in the home of the dead of the winter, the opposite culmination from tonight, from the 30th. And the next new moon in Capricorn arrives January 7th, 2027 at 17 degrees and is reseeding the institutional story one more time. So the arc from here runs tonight. The moon walks the emptied house at full light. In July, she reseeds the body and its belonging into the dark at the new moon. Then in August, the larger eclipse season reorganizes along the Leo-Aquarius line. In December, her light comes full at home in Cancer. And in January, then we come back to Capricorn. The question the whole arc asks is whether the ungovernable feminine, given the run of the vacated Capricorn, can set terms of her own before the heavy machinery of obligation moves back in. And then look for yourself too. Now that there's a full empty house in Capricorn, there's some space to breathe after transformation and change. Can you set something here in the full light that we can come back to in 6 months? Now next is rising signs. So start with your rising sign. If you don't know your rising sign, you can use your sun sign. And to find your rising sign, come for a reading with me. I'll be right back. Full moon in Capricorn, Cancer rising. This full moon lands in your 7th house with the sun in your 1st house. So the axis that is lit is about you across from someone else. It's the self against the partner or the closest other. And it's any partner. It's any beloved and platonic and business partners and people that we're close to, the closest others. Capricorn on the 7th house is the relationship as a binding agreement, a contract, a long obligation to another person, a place where commitment could really harden into duty if it's performed on a schedule. The moon at full there brings visibility to whatever has been running on obligation in your closest bonds. It's the care that's given because it's owed rather than because it is rising freely from you. Picture the version of this that you know, the standing weekly call that you make to a parent or a partner, less because you want to than because skipping it costs more than making the call. Or the relationship is maintained a way that a mortgage is serviced. The sun in your first house holds the other end, your own body, your needs, the self that has been kept smaller so that whatever this arrangement was could hold. With the moon out of bounds in that 7th house, the care that you've been pouring into one of your partnerships has already stepped past the limit of what the arrangement formally allows for. And at this full moon, you can see it laid out in full light. Saturn, ruler of that 7th house, sits in your 10th house in Aries, squaring the lights, which puts the question of the partnership and the question of your public life and vocation into the same conversation, as though the cost of the bond and the cost of the career were being totted up on one bill. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 8th is the house of what is shared and what is owed between two people. And this is the one that I would hold. The demand that the deepest shared accounts, the deepest, the money, the bodies, the power, the intimacy, all be settled on equal terms instead of just lopsided ones. This is not a full moon for any kind of staged confrontation that you would regret the next day. It is the full moon for seeing clearly which of your obligations run both ways and which only run from you outward. And for letting that lunar light show you the difference fully before you decide what any of it is owed. The moon at full is saying, don't leave, just count. Full moon in Capricorn, Leo rising. The moon comes to full in your 6th house with the sun in your 12th house. So this full moon lights up the work and the body against whatever is hidden and whatever is undone. Capricorn in the 6th house is labor as obligation, the job, the daily grind, the health regimen, right? The things that run like a sentence to be served. And then the service given on the institution schedule, whether or not the body agrees. This full moon there brings every overrun of your working life into visibility. Whatever tasks that you're taking on because they were owed, whatever shifts that you covered because no one else would, however you pushed the body past its tide because whatever you were doing wouldn't pause for it. Think of the way that you keep going on the day that you should have stayed in bed, or the appointment that you kept while running a fever because the calendar didn't care that you were ill. The sun in the 12th house, the house of what is hidden and retreat and of self-undoing, holds the cost here. The exhaustion that's accumulated slowly out of sight. The part of you that's quietly running down while work gets done and is praised. With the moon out of bounds in the 6th, what you've been doing has gone past the limit of what a body can sustain. And this light is showing you the overdraft in full. And then Saturn, ruler of that 6th house, sits in your 9th house in Aries, which connects the question of your daily labor to the bigger question of meaning, to what you would take the work to be, suggesting that the grind is drifted away from anything that you believe in and become motion for its own sake. The reach towards Juno and Pluto in your 7th house asks whether the terms of your working relationships, the people that you work alongside, and the people that you work under are equal or only dressed as equal, and whether a closer partnership might be carrying a similar imbalance. The instruction for this full moon is to read the body before the institution reads it for you, and before the system decides on your behalf what you can spare. Out of bounds, this moon in your 6th is the body that has already quietly stopped consenting to be spent at whatever rate that you're spending it. So tonight, at this full moon, let yourself know. Full moon in Capricorn, Virgo Rising. This full moon falls in your 5th house with the sun in your 11th house. So the axis runs between your own creative output, your pleasure, your children, your romance, and the larger collective that you belong to. Capricorn in the 5th house is the place where joy gets put on a schedule, where creative work is made to justify itself by its usefulness, and where even pleasure has to earn its keep before you will allow it. The moon full there lights up whatever you have been making yourself perform. Maybe it's creativity treated as a deliverable with a deadline, or parenting that's run like a project with certain milestones, even romance that's held to a standard instead of just allowed to breathe and be foolish. Picture the painting that you will not start until you can promise yourself it will be good, or the play that you ration because it hasn't been earned yet. The sun in the 11th house is on the other end, the community, the network, the friends, and the wider cause, the place where your individual making meets the collective and is either fed by it or flattened into it. With the moon out of bounds in the 5th house, your creative and erotic life has already pressed past the limit that the institution would set for it, gone somewhere unsanctioned. And at this full moon, you can see just how far past the fence it wandered. Saturn rules your 5th house and sits in your 8th house in Aries. It's tying your creative output to the deep, shared resources, the money and power held in common with others, the inheritance and the debt, which can be read as the pressure to make your joy pay for itself out of someone else's pocket or someone else's gaze. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 6th house connects the demand for equal terms to your daily labor and health. The question of whether your making is killing you to please a system or sustaining you despite it. This lunar light is saying, look hard at what you've been creating purely because it is required of you, and to feel the difference in your body between that and what wants to come out of you when no one is timing it, no one is watching, and nothing is being graded. What do you create just for the joy of creating? The second thing is the one this out of bounds moon is lit up over. So follow it. Full moon in Capricorn, Libra Rising. Hi, Libra. This full moon sits directly on your angles. The moon in your 4th house and the sun in your 10th, the home against the career, the private route against the public standing. For you, the Cancer Capricorn axis is the meridian of the chart, the vertical beam that the whole wheel hangs from for you. So this full moon is loud in a way that it is not for anyone else. Capricorn on the 4th is the home run as an institution, as a system, and the family as an obligation. The household is held to a standard, and the roots feel more like duty than belonging. The parent that you are still trying to satisfy decades later, the moon at full there lights up the whole interior arrangement. So the care that was given inside the family because it was owed, the domestic weight that has never once been counted as work, the way that the private foundation was made to perform on cue, all of those expectations of you. And then the sun in the 10th house holds the public side, the career, the reputation, the role that you occupy in the eyes of the world, the version of you that gets introduced at the door. So the two are in opposition at this full moon, and they're both lit up. And the reading is the oldest one that this axis can carry. The public role is standing on a private foundation that has been carrying uncounted. So with the moon out of bounds at the very bottom of your chart, the domestic labor that went past the expectations, past what anyone acknowledged, and then Saturn, your 7th ruler, sits in that 10th house in Aries alongside the sun, which pulls partnership into the public reckoning as well. So the question of who you are to the world, who you are at home, and who you are to your closest are all on the table for this full moon. And the light is saying, see what your visible standing rests on when you trace it all the way down. And when you begin counting what your foundation, what your household and the people in it were paying so that the career could stand upright, this is the most exposed full moon of the 12 for your rising sign. So don't waste it on pretending anything, on performing competence. Use it to look at the foundation and to say, even quietly, what it has cost you to keep the top part shining. Capricorn full moon, Scorpio rising. Hi, Scorpios. The moon comes to full in our 3rd house with the sun in our 9th house. So the axis that is lit for this full moon runs between our immediate mind, voice, speech, and writing, and then the local life, and then the larger view, the meaning and the distance, and the belief that organizes all of it. Capricorn in the 3rd is the mind made to perform on a schedule. It's thought treated as output. The voice is held to a discipline. The daily communications run as obligation instead of the living thing that they could be. And the moon at full there brings our own speech and thinking to visibility. How much of our daily expression has been duty? How much of our writing or our talking has been done because it was owed to someone, or posted because the schedule demanded a post, said because the silence would have cost us? Think of the messages that we answer out of obligation, the words that we produce on command, while the thing that we most want to say sits unwritten. The sun in our 9th house holds the larger end, the philosophy, study, journey, the higher view. It's supposed to give the daily voice its meaning, and then perhaps has gone quiet under the weight of all of this routine. With the moon out of bounds in our 3rd, the voice has gone past the limit that the system would have set on it, said or wanted to say something unsanctioned. And at this full moon, we can hear it pressing on the edge. Then Saturn, our ruler in the 3rd, from the 3rd, sits in our 6th house in Aries, connecting us, our mind and our voice, to the daily labor and health, the grind that has been shaping how and what we let ourselves say, often by exhausting us out of saying anything true. The reach towards Juno and Pluto in our 4th house ties the demand for equal terms to our home and our roots, the family conversations where our standing has never been equal, and the lunar light is now saying, why? The institution is to listen to our voice and then tell apart the thing that is reciting, the thing that is performing fluency, the thing that's keeping the peace from the part that means what it says. This out of bounds moon in our 3rd house is the sentence that we have not let ourselves speak. You do not have to publish it today. You just have to admit that it exists. Sagittarius, Capricorn, full moon. This full moon falls in your second house with the sun in your eighth house. So the full moon lights up your own money and what you are worth against the money that you share with other people. The second house is your bank balance, your paycheck, and what you can charge for your work, the body and the energy that you have to spend. Capricorn sitting there has had you running your own worth like a job that you could be fired from, where you only feel allowed to exist on the days that you produce something. The moon coming to full there shows you just how completely you have tied your value to your output. Picture yourself checking your account before you let yourself rest, or taking yourself out of a sick day because the day feels like money lost. Quoting a low number for your work because asking for more felt greedy. Even a slow week lands on you as proof that you are not worthy, and you have been believing it. The sun in your eighth house holds the other side, the money that's tangled up with other people, like the joint account and the debt that you carry, and a loan to a sibling that never came back, or inheritance with strings on it. The partner whose finances grew into yours on terms that maybe nobody ever sat down and agreed to. With the moon out of bounds in the second house, the thing that's pressing on you is plain. You are worth much, much more than you have been charging, and more than anyone has been paying you. And tonight, the lunar night shows you the size of that gap. Saturn rules your second house and sits in your fifth in Aries, which ties your money straight to the thing that you make for love, and raises the real question of whether the work that you would do for joy could also be the work that pays your rent. Juno and Pluto in your third house put the demand for equal terms into your own mouth. The plain right to say out loud what you are owed and by whom. So tonight, at this full moon, stop letting your busiest week set your price. Look at what you are owed by your employer and by your family and by the people whose money has tangled with yours, and let yourself see for your real worth before you accept anyone else's number. Capricorn Rising, Capricorn full moon. This moon is your first house, and with the sun in your seventh house, the moon is lit up on your own ascendant. So this moon is all about you in the most direct the way that it can be. This moon at full on your rising sign is your body, your needs, your own visible self brought to maximum light. And because she sits in her detriment here, the reading carries an edge that the other signs don't feel quite as sharply as you do. You've been operating in your own life on the system's terms. You've been performing your own selfhood on a schedule. You've been overriding your own tide to meet obligation. You've been treating your body the way that Capricorn treats everything, as a resource to be managed instead of a creature to be fed. Tonight, that becomes impossible to keep out of sight. So think about how you greet exhaustion with a plan to be more efficient. How you have learned to ask yourself what a hard manager would ask of an employee. The sun in your seventh house holds the other, the partner, the close relationship that has served as the counterweight to all of that self-management, sometimes by carrying the softness that you would not allow yourself. With the moon out of bounds right on your ascendant, your own body has gone past the limit that the system would set for it. It has exceeded what the arrangement had budgeted. And the lunar light is full on the plain fact you are more, and you need more. More than the terms that you were ever handed, more than you've ever allowed for, more. Saturn, your own chart ruler, sits in your fourth house in Aries, pulling your home and your roots at the foundation of this reckoning, asking what your whole hard-built selfhood rests on, and whether the ground under it was ever solid. The reach between Juno and Pluto in your second house connects the demand for equal terms to your own resources and your own worth. It's the insistence that you be valued, including by yourself, on fair terms. This is your full moon more than anyone else's in the zodiac, and the instructions are the hardest and the simplest that there are. Stop running yourself on the clock that was built to take from you. The mother's light is on your own face tonight. So let it show you that as a person instead of an asset. Aquarius Rising, full moon in Capricorn. The moon comes to full in your 12th house with the sun in your 6th house. So the axis that is lit for you runs between the hidden, the place of the retreat and the undoing and dissolution, and the daily labor and health that fill your visible days. Capricorn in the 12th house is obligation that has gone underground. It's the duty that you carry when no one can see it. It's the weight that has been settled into your sleep and your solitude and your private dread. It's the care that you give in secret or give to yourself in the dark when the day is over and there's no one left to perform for. The moon at full there brings the hidden to visibility, which is a strange gift of a 12th house full moon. It's the light going on in one room of the chart that's built to stay dim. So the exhaustion that you filed away where it cannot be counted, or the grief or the resentment that's stored out of sight, the part of your life that has been running on obligation behind a closed door for so long that you had stopped hearing it. Picture the nights that you cannot sleep for what is running in your head, the worry that you let no one see because admitting it would cost you competence. The sun in the 6th house holds the other end, the visible labor, the work and the body and the daily round that everyone does see you do and does watch you perform. And it's the place where the hidden cost finally shows itself as a symptom. With the moon out of bounds in the 12th, the buried weight has gone past the limit that anyone else would set on it. It's exceeded what any person can carry unseen, and the lunar light reaches even into the house of the unseen to lay it open. Saturn, your 12th ruler, sits in your 3rd house in Aries, connecting the hidden burden to your voice and to your daily mind, which suggests that what you have buried is pressing towards language. It's wanting to be said in plain words instead of carried in silence. And the reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 1st house ties the demand for equal terms to your own body and your own self. The insistence that you be met fairly. This is the night for retreat rather than action, and for letting the light into the room that you keep shut, and for beginning to say, even if only to yourself, what you have carried where no one could see. Pisces Rising, Capricorn full moon. This full moon falls in your 11th house with the sun in your 5th house. So tonight lights up the collective that you belong to, the network and the friends and the larger cause against your own individual making, your pleasure, your romance, your heart. Capricorn on the 11th is the group run as a system, the community that's held together by obligation instead of warmth, the cause that maybe has hardened into duty, and the network that you maintain because the maintenance is owed, and dropping it would cost you something that you're not ready to give up. The moon at full there brings your collective belonging into visibility. Which of your alliances are alive, and which do you sustain out of obligation? How much of your hope for a larger future has been running on duty instead of desire? How many rooms do you sit in because leaving would be read as betrayal? Picture the group chat that you cannot mute, the organizing meeting that you attend on fumes, the friendships kept on a schedule of obligation long after the warmth has gone. The sun in the 5th house holds the individual end, your own creative output, your romance, your children, the joy that belongs to you alone, and perhaps has been starved in order to feed the collective. With the moon out of bounds in the 11th, your investment in the group has already gone past the limit that the system would set on it. It overspent past what you can sustain. And the lunar lights are showing you exactly where you have been pouring yourself into a future that may not be pouring anything back. Saturn, your 11th ruler, sits in your second house in Aries and tying the collective question to your own resources and your own worth, raising the plain matter of what your belonging has cost you in material terms, and what you've given the group from a purse that was never full. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 12th house connects the demand for equal terms to the hidden and the contemplative, the settling of accounts that happens out of sight, in retreat, before it can be spoken out loud. The light tonight asks you to tell apart the communities that feed you from the ones that you only feed, and to let yourself feel, without apology, the difference between hope and obligation in everything that you have said that you would do. Aries Rising, Capricorn full moon. The moon comes to full in your 10th house with the sun in your 4th house. So the axis lit between your public vocation and your private root, the career and the home, the standing that you hold in the eyes of the world, and the foundation underneath it that no one sees. Capricorn on the 10th is the most literal placement of the institution that the wheel offers. Your career as the institution itself, your reputation held to a punishing standard, the public role that has been eating the private hours for years and calling it ambition. The moon at full at the very top of your chart lights up your whole vocational life. How much of your public work has been duty performed on a schedule someone else set? And how much of your visible self was built to satisfy the institution's terms rather than your own? How much of the climb was driven by the fear of failing and what that would look like? Picture the promotion that you chased past the point of wanting it, the title that you kept polishing because stopping would feel like disappearing, the achievements that look like freedom from the outside but a sentence from within. The sun in the 4th house holds the home, the root, the private foundation that has been quietly paying for the public ascent. Even the family hours and the rest and the belonging spent to keep the career upright. With the moon out of bounds in your 10th house, your public labor has already pressed past the sanctioned limit. It's gone further than the role was ever meant to demand. And the lunar lights are full in the overrun. Saturn, your 10th ruler, sits in your own 1st house in Aries, which puts your body and your very self directly into the vocational reckoning, saying in the bluntest terms what the career has been costing you in the flesh and what you have spent of your own life to keep the top of the chart shining. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 11th house ties the demand for equal terms to your networks and your larger hopes, the people and movements that you have aligned with, and whether they meet you fairly. Tonight, and with this full moon, you will see what your public standing rests on when you trace it down to the root, and then feel where the climb has gone past what your body can keep paying for. Taurus Rising, Capricorn full moon. This full moon falls in your 9th house with the sun in your 3rd house. So tonight lights up the larger view, the study, the long journey, the belief that organizes a whole life against your immediate mind, your voice, your daily speech, and your local world. Capricorn on the 9th house is meaning run as obligation and belief that was held as duty, and the philosophy or faith or course of study that hardened from a living question into a retirement that you fulfill on a requirement that you fulfill on a schedule. The moon at full there brings your relationship to the larger view and into visibility. Which of your convictions are still alive in you, and which do you carry only because they were handed to you and you never set them down? How much of your search for meaning has been performed to someone else's standard? How much of what you call belief is obedience wearing belief's clothes. Picture the degree that you finished for someone else, or the faith that you keep up at the holidays to avoid the argument, or the worldview that you defend in public while a quieter doubt runs underneath. The sun in the third house holds the daily mind, the immediate voice, the local life, and the ordinary talk that the larger view is meant to feed, and perhaps starved instead. With the moon out of bounds in the ninth, you reach for meaning that has already gone past the limit that the system would set on it, and it's wandered somewhere unsanctioned. Tonight, you can see just how far past the fence it has gone. Saturn in your ninth sits in the 12th house in Aries, and it's connecting the question of meaning to the hidden and the contemplative, which suggests that belief that is really yours is forming somewhere out of sight, away from anyone's approval, and you're not ready to speak it out loud. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 10th house ties the demand for equal terms to your public vocation, the standing that you hold, and whether the world meets you on level ground. So this full moon is saying, tell apart the beliefs that you hold from the ones that you've just been obeying. Let the lunar light fall on the difference between, without flinching from what it shows about how much of your certainty was really borrowed and how much is yours. Gemini Rising, Capricorn full moon. This moon comes to full in your 8th house with the sun in your 2nd house. So the axis that is lit with this full moon runs between what is shared and what is yours. The deep common resources and the money and power and bodies held in entanglement with other people against your own resourcing, your own worth, your own body and what it is worth. Capricorn in the 8th house is shared resources, but run as an obligation. The joint account managed as a duty, the debt and the inheritance and the financial and the bodily entanglement with others held under institutional weight and lopsided terms. The moon at full there brings deep shared accounts to visibility, what you owe and what is owed to you. The power held in common that has been running on uneven terms for years, the intimacy that has been administered rather than felt, and the places where your life and someone else's have grown together at the root, and the division of them was never fair. Picture the inheritance that came with strings, or the shared finances where your name is on the account but not the decisions. The closeness that quietly costs you more than it returns, and the sun in the 2nd that holds your own end, your own resources, the worth that is yours to set without reference to anyone, the body and the value that do not belong to the shared pot. With the moon out of bounds in the 8th house, the shared accounts have already passed the sanction limit. They have already exceeded what the arrangement was ever meant to hold, and this lunar light is full on the imbalance. Saturn, your 8th ruler, sits in your 11th in Aries, connecting the deep shared resources to your networks and your larger hopes, the collective and the friendships that you are financially and emotionally entangled with. The reach toward Juno and Pluto in your 9th house carries the demand for equal terms up into the realm of meaning and belief, asking that the larger account, the question of what you take life to before, settled on terms that you can stand behind instead of the ones that you inherited. So this is your full moon to look hard at what is held in common and asked if the division was ever fair, and if it is, to read the full account of what is shared before you agree to carry one more uncounted debt.